She packed my bags last night, pre-flight, 0 hour, 9 a.m. And I'm gonna be
Control, we passed the 6-minute mark in our countdown for Apollo 11. Now 5 minutes, 52 seconds and counting. We're on time at the present time for our planned liftoff of 32 minutes past the hour. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25
I
seconds.
miss my wife.
20 seconds and counting.
It's lonely out in space.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12,
Such a
11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. Touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh, no, no, no. I'm a rocket man, burning out his fuse out here at home. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh, no, no, no. I'm a rocket man.
During the 1950s, the US and Soviets had entered the Cold War, and the tensions between communism and democracy had spread throughout the world. The tensions were fueled by an arms race and the threat of nuclear warfare, especially seen by the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Ideas of espionage spread throughout the world, which increased the tensions even more. These tensions would be seen in the space race, as this was another arena for conflict. The space race essentially began on October 4th, 1957, when a Soviet ICBM launched Sputnik into space. Sputnik is Russian for traveler, and was the world's first artificial satellite and the first man-made object to be placed into orbit around Earth. Sputnik's launch came as a surprise to the world, and especially the United States. The US believed that they had been technologically and morally superior to the Soviets. So this was a shock to Americans. The US had always seen space as the next frontier, an area where they can expand upon their great stature, and so it was important for them not to lose too much to the Soviets.
In 1958, the U.S. launched its own satellite, Explorer 1, into space, and President Dwight Eisenhower signed an order creating the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, an agency dedicated to space exploration. Also, in response to the Soviets' actions, the U.S. government implemented more science and math classes into public education systems. For example, calculus was implemented into high schools nationwide. Another blow to the United States advancements came on April 12, 1961, when Yuri Gagarin was the first human to journey into outer space and complete an orbit around Earth. Once again, the U.S. had been beat by the Soviets, which angered Americans even more. However, public opinion changed when John F. Kennedy was elected president in January of 1961. And on September 12, 1962, he delivered one of the most memorable speeches.
For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
The primary objective of Apollo 11 was to complete a national goal set by President John F. Kennedy to perform a crewed lunar landing and return to Earth. Apollo 11 launched from the Kennedy Space Center on July 16, 1969, carrying Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Module Pilot Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin into an initial Earth orbit. An estimated 530 million people tuned in to watch Armstrong's televised image and heard his voice describe the event as he took.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Columbia, this is Houston, AOS, over. Houston, Columbia, Gate, over. Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully.
Armstrong and Aldrin spent 21 hours, 36 minutes on the moon's surface, and re-entry procedures were initiated on July 24th. 44 hours after leaving lunar orbit, a flight over 195 hours splashed down into the Pacific Ocean, 13 miles from the recovery ship USS Hornet.
The U.S. had accomplished its goals established by the late JFK and was the first country to perform a crewed lunar landing and return to Earth. After the crew had reached land, they went through customs in Hawaii, declaring moon rocks and moon dust among their items. After about 3 weeks of quarantine, the astronauts were released to enjoy parades in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. The astronauts had become national heroes and were now globally recognized for their accomplishments. This was both the end and the beginning to a long journey for the U.S. and was a major victory over communism in the world. However, this triumph often covers up the tragedies of the missions before. For example, one of the tragedies occurred in the Apollo 1 mission on January 27, 1967, when the crew of Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were killed in a fire in the Apollo Command Module during a pre-flight test at Cape Canaveral. They were training for the first crewed Apollo flight, an Earth orbiting mission scheduled to be launched on 21 February 1967. The plan was to go through an entire countdown sequence, but a fire started and killed all of the crew. The triumph of the Apollo 11 mission over the tragedies that came before it, as well as its victory over the Russians, was revered throughout the country. But how is it looked at in today's society? Since the Apollo 11 mission in 1969, there have been many speculations and questions about whether or not the US actually went to the moon. There are many conspiracy theories, one of which believes that the footage of Armstrong stepping on the moon was done on the Hollywood stage. These theories have tainted the original image and triumph of the Apollo 11 mission and have no scientific evidence to back it up. The real long-term tragedy of the Apollo 11 mission is that the US and NASA never truly carried out on its promises, as since then we have not returned to the moon or completed spatial expansion. In fact, all of NASA's missions are unmanned, except for the astronauts of NASA who are on the International Space Station. In fact, many of NASA's space missions today are run by outside institutions, which is the wave of the future if we were ever going to venture and perhaps live as humans beyond Earth. One of these examples is the SpaceX program, run by Tesla CEO Elon Musk. The SpaceX program was established in 2002 with the goal of reducing space transportation costs and enabling the colonization of Mars. SpaceX is living up to its promises and have had 5 launches so far this year. However, the future only knows whether or not humans can someday inhabit another planet or travel throughout the galaxies, and the triumph of Apollo 11 during the Cold War was the first step in the right directions for Americans.